Good morning. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Oh, this fell down. I think it did fall down. Let's see if it works. I have problems with this stuff. I do have a clock, so I know I'll finish on time, so that's all right. Is this better? Is this better? Does this sound like God? It's not loud enough. Okay. So, how many of you are here representing your business, your companies? Great. Thank you. Do they know you're here? So I'd like, first of all, think in your mind a person with a disability. You got a picture in your mind? Got that picture? Everybody got that picture? I'm not going to give you too many assignments. Now think of jobs that you have at your place of work appropriate for that person, because that's going to provide a little context for what we're going to talk about today. Everybody got that? We're going to come back to that later. Now everybody has a story, so I'm going to tell this story, and I hope that you get to see a little bit of yours. We all get to see a little bit of ourselves in the story. Mine begins with my family. That was a picture taken a couple of years ago. That's my youngest daughter on the left, my oldest daughter on the bottom, my wife in the middle, and my son, who's now 27, Austin, is there on the right. He's the middle child. He has autism. He was diagnosed at 3, didn't talk until he was 10. And I always say he's trying to make up for lost time. He loves Michael J. Fox, The Simpsons, Stephen King, 1880 cars, American Airlines, and now he's studying, for some reason, the American labor movement. Don't know why, but you give kids encyclopedias, they'll do the oddest things. He drives. He was one of the first kids he was probably the first kid in our school system they let go through the school system. Back when he started, we sent people like Austin somewhere else. He passed his driver's test the first time. His sister on the left, Allison, failed hers twice. One day when Allison had some friends over, Austin is listening to her on the periphery, and he says, just out of the blue, "Elmer, Allison failed her driver's test twice. Didn't go over too well." So I said, "Austin, you can't talk about Allison's driver's test. You can only talk about your own." "Elmer, on my driver's test, I did not back over a yard." And Austin works now. He works full time, but on his days off, he's my driver. He brought me to the airport yesterday. We had to get up early. He had to get up we got up at 5:30. And every time he'll do that, he'll come pick me up at the airport if he's available. I pay him $20. And $20 matters. You know, I don't pay him more than that because he's using my equipment. So I can justify it on that. But he brought me to the airport yesterday, and every experience is always the same. We'll get there, he'll complain a little bit about the traffic, but he'll even take my bag downstairs without complaint. He'll get up without complaint. We'll get to the airport, we'll pull up to the gate, and every time I will say, "Austin, you got up early, you got my bags downstairs, you got me here safely. Thank you, and I love you." And every time, Austin will turn to me and say, $20. So, but despite Austin's charm and his abilities, he probably reads about 4th grade level. He can't do long division or multiplication. He's never gotten a phone call, never written an email, never gotten an email, never been invited to a party. I've never played a game with my son, not even a game of catch. I've never gotten a spontaneous, how parents do to their children, "I love you," and they're supposed to say back, "I love you." I've never gotten that back. I've gotten back lots of times, "Why do you always keep saying that? Why do you always keep saying that, Dad?" But Austin is the only child, because that was the other thing. When Austin was young, we worried about, does he really have feelings? Does he love us like, you're typically children. They're always coming spontaneously, I love you, Daddy, or I love you, Mommy, or whatever. And we learned that, does Austin feel that way? I remember one time when we came back from a trip. And we have 3 children. But there was only one standing on the corner in the snow waiting for us. And we said, Austin, why were you waiting for us? And Austin said, I love you in his own way. He said, you've been gone a long time. Not the typical way of saying it, but does Austin love us more than we ever deserve? But he does have those challenges, and if he's like his peers, the likelihood he would never be offered a job. I'm being still, and I don't know why this is happening. Have you got one of these on you too? Okay, this is going to drive me crazy. I've never had this happen, except for last night. Because when it comes to getting a job, people with disabilities die 1,000 cuts. I know it. I know as a parent. I know about worrying about it, laying in bed at night. Because I know if driving would be like the equivalent for other children graduating summa cum laude, a job would be like a Nobel Prize. But when it comes to getting that job, people with disabilities likely can't get even through that online application that many of us have, or all those questions that we have, or that psychological test, or that mathematics test, or that continuous employment history that we look for, or getting through that FIT interview when they ask questions like, what if this, what would you do? Austin couldn't answer a question like that. He can't figure out, why would you want to know a what if it hadn't happened? He would not get through that. And the unkind is cut by most of us that people with disabilities really can't do the job, or they can do a lesser job, or it's great if you can hire a person with a disability if you can afford it. Now, that person that you're thinking of, that you thought of with a disability, was that job your job you thought of? Was it a job that had a future, or was it a make-work job? Because most of us tend to think, if you work in a grocery store, what job do you want to give people? We were going to give them bagging, or we're going to give them getting the carts. In a Walgreens store, well, they can stock the shelves, but they can't run a cash register. If we work in our distribution centers, they can do custodian, but they can't do mission-critical work that's timely. That's probably the typical mindset. Not that everybody has that, but that's where we were. So what we did is, here I am confronted with this situation and realizing that there are parents out there, and oh, by the way, I knew I was on the top of the pyramid in our company, but we have 240,000 people, most of those of which are hourly folks. And if I'm laying in bed staring at the ceiling, you need a battery? No. Not for this? This is pretty good. I'll just keep going.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Go put it over here. I'll put it back in the pocket, though.
It was good. Okay.
Okay. It was just me bad.
Wow.
Okay.
It's not on.
It's not on?
You might need to put the mic closer to your mic, because when you get closer, you put your mic.
When I do this?
Yeah.
I'll just talk like this. Okay. I usually don't have these kind of this is really not fun. All right, I'm going to hold this right here. I got 2 hands. I got 2 problems.
You know why? Because you guys did this one.
Now we're better?
Yeah, go ahead.
Am I better now? Yeah. Okay. Did I tell you about my family yet? Okay. So here I am. I'm faced with this. And at the other hand, I'm this big exec at Walgreens in charge of a division of 10,000 people. And we're hiring 1,000 people a year. And it got to be very simple. If we can't do something about this problem, and oh, by the way, the solution is a job, and we're sitting on top of all these jobs. Who can, if we can? So one of our first forays in this was to engage enclaves. Enclave is when you go out to another company that deals with people with disabilities, and you contract out, but it's inside your place of operation. And they would bring in people with disabilities with their own supervision, and we would give them ancillary tasks like labeling merchandise or custodial. And it was kind of inside. It was apart. It wasn't the online operation of our centers. And people were giving us awards. And they were saying, what a great employer, and they give us these little plaques and everything else, and what a great job we were doing. People would say, in our centers would talk about the enclave and how great everybody was, and our Perrysburg site down near Toledo. When they closed down the Ohio Turnpike, I remember our general manager called me up and says, look, they closed the turnpike. One of our folks from the enclave called, and they said they're going to walk into work. If I could have everybody else like that, what a fantastic... I'd hear all these great heroic stories. And I was down in our Dallas center, and they had an enclave. And I was talking to this woman, and she was telling me how great that enclave is. And says, we've given them team member T-shirts and team member badges, like that yellow badge I had. And it's working out great. And she showed me a picture. And she's in the picture, and these are some of the members of the enclave. And I'm looking I don't know this woman from Adam. And she obviously sees the confusion on my face, so she says, oh, but I'm not one of them. I'm their sponsor. There you had it. Us, them. They weren't doing mission critical work, they weren't earning the same pay, and they weren't us. And that was a real eye-opener. And I remember thinking, we've got to do better than this. So what we did, we said, we have all these people in our building, and we think, they show up, they've done all. Why don't we try some people out, actually hire them, and put them on the line? So we hired this young man named Chuck. Chuck was working in an enclave, probably being paid piece rate or something. We don't know what he was being paid. Has a degree in accounting and drives. And he was working in an enclave. We put him on a line, making start wage $15 an hour. We know Chuck is on the spectrum. He's a high end of the spectrum. We put him between two ladies. Now we learned that Chuck has some quirks. That's what we call that. Or some people call Chuck weird. It's hard to carry on a conversation, but one of the things we know about his quirks is he loves the color purple. And the reason we know that, every time a purple tote would pass through Chuck's area, about 2 or 3 times a day, Chuck would stop, start dancing, and shout out with glee and call everybody's attention to the purple tote. And we had to think, is this appropriate behavior for the workplace? Can we accommodate this type of behavior? And we got to thinking, which is more important, style or performance? And which would we rather have when it comes to style? Complaining or dancing? Let's go with the dancing. Now, what Chuck taught us, that performance comes in lots of different packages. And when I went there to talk to those ladies, I asked him, how is Chuck doing? He's doing fine. Does he help out when he needs to? Yes, he does. Does anybody in this building, of this 500 people, has anybody said anything about Chuck? Does he make them feel comfortable? Have they made a comment about Chuck? And she said, well, if they do, they're going to have to come through us. Now we were making progress. It was us. It wasn't them. So then it came a time that we thought this was a huge success, and we saw these in places around. And that kind of emboldened us that, yes, this could work. So when it came time to design a whole new center that was going to open up in 2007, and we started planning in about 2002, we said, we're going to have to do it's going to be more automated than we've ever done. Why can't, and we're going to have to do all the systems over and over again. Why can't we just tweak it, just tweak the automation, kind of open up our minds to tweak it, make it flexible enough that maybe enable a large number of people with disabilities to perform as well as anybody else. Now remember, Walgreens, we make 3 cents on the dollar. So we have competitors like anybody else. So this could not be a charity. And part of the dream was we wanted to have all our businesses as objective and have an inclusive work environment. And we wanted it to be enough people with disabilities so there could be no doubt that people with disabilities had to pay their weight. Now sometimes, and we had done this before, when you have one person out of 100 over here, nobody, they become sort of the mascot. You try to figure, everybody covers for them. But we said we want to have enough numbers that it's mission critical work that there can be no doubt that everybody's pulling their weight. So here's what we're going to do. If we're going to justify this to our shareholders and to our board, we're not going to lower any of our standards, our work performance standards. It's going to be same jobs, same pay, side by side. And talk about all jobs. That was kind of the goal. That was sort of a dream. And we took inspiration from a phrase from a builder, Daniel Burnham, who was famous in Chicago for the Columbian Exposition, and one of the builders in the heyday of Chicago was his building. Daniel Burnham, who said, "Make no small plans, for they fail to stir men's blood." We aimed high on a number. 1 out of 3 people in this building would be a person with a disability. That was our target. And we looked the world over, and we couldn't find anybody at scale. Numbers we were talking about, it's going to be 200 people out of 600 people in a building. And a mission-critical site, something that had never been done. So our standard, that's where we want to aim high. And our standard of performance, when people said, well, the board asked, what if it doesn't work? Said, well, like everything else that we try that doesn't always work, we'll adjust. And they said, okay. And the only thing the board said since then is, thank you. And when people who have to execute this, when they say, we don't know about any but things with disabilities, they ask about it. What happens if we make a mistake? What if it doesn't work? I said, here's the standard. Don't know if it's 1 out of 3, 1 out of 5, 1 out of 10. But if it doesn't work, this is what we want to tell the world. If we couldn't do it, then nobody can. And we want to sleep well at night. Just give it our best. We're going to make mistakes, and we're going to learn from them, and we move on. And we're not going to try to anticipate every problem. Just like we don't try to anticipate every problem in everything else we try to do. There's no rewards for success except the satisfaction, and there's no punishment for failure because we've given it our best. And everybody rose up to that. Now we knew because of those enclaves that a lot of these people couldn't get through our traditional hiring. That was one of the things we did think on the front end, saying because most of us businesses, and I hear this, and this was our mindset, I'm open to everybody. In all the businesses, do you have D&I statements, diversity and inclusion statements? Probably on your websites. I've heard so many of those when people talk about disability. Just read our website. We're open to everybody. Probably it's like back in the 50s. We're open to everybody. So where are the women? Well, we're open to everybody if we can only find a qualified candidate. That's the way it is with disabilities. I'm open, just bring me more qualified candidates. You know what a qualified candidate is? A person that doesn't act or look like they have a disability. So we had this traditional, now this is the one thing we've learned about our hiring process. This doesn't apply to any of the other businesses in the room. This is our issue. We have this wonderful screening process to go out there and find great employees. When we put an application up, 75 to 100 people apply. I would say 99% of those are people without disabilities. And we have this process to get them in the door. And we test things like continuous work history, experience, those things. We ask questions. Give me an example of teamwork, what if, all those kind of things. Now, that's to help predict what kind of employee, because we're trying to get a good employee on the other side. We found that there's some failures on the other side of getting through that process, no matter how charming they are, no matter how well they get through that test, and no matter what their experience. So we know it's not a perfect process. And we know it, and I knew if my son went through that process and they said, give me an example of teamwork, he couldn't do that. But if you ask him, they don't answer, and we don't ask the questions that we should ask somebody like Austin. Do you help out when somebody asks you to? Have you ever gotten mad at your boss? When somebody hurts your feelings, Austin, do you ever hold a grudge? Do you hold any resentments? Those are questions we never ask. Have you ever judged anybody? Have you ever treated anybody different because of their race, their gender, their religion, their sexual preference, their politics, their money, their status? We don't ask those questions. Austin, will you be here every day? Or Austin, have you ever taken a sick day when you didn't feel like coming in because something else to do? Or Austin, will you be here the day after the Super Bowl when all that flu goes through this country? Austin, will you be here the first day of deer season? We don't ask those questions. So what we did is we said we're going to have to create an alternative way to get in. Based on performance. We call it a transitional work group. And we set it up so what we would expect is our partners to go out in the community. We'd say, you understand our job. We don't know how to find people with disabilities. We don't know how to train people with disabilities. We don't know how to really screen people with disabilities. So partners, agencies, Voc Rehab, all the kind of, on what we call the supply side, will you come in and understand our jobs, find people? We'll tell you how many people we want to hire. In this building, we've planned on hiring 75 people with disabilities day one. Will you go out and find us 75 people that you think can do the job? Pre-screen those, and then we're going to bring them inside, and you need to bring job coaches. We're going to manage them, and we're going to hire them as if they were temps, not with all the other benefits that we'd hire somebody that came in through the front door. A person with disability, if they can get through the normal screening, they can go through the front door. But we have another door over here. Their choice, not our choice. And the partners, can you do that? And what we're going to do is we're going to look at their performance over 1 to 7 weeks. And when we started out, as long as they are progressing, we believe they'll be eventually successful. And as soon as we think they're going to be successful, they're number one in the hire. They're hired. Full benefits, everything. Even their seniority or length of service starts from the day they were in that transitional work group. Even if Albert Einstein walks in the same day through the main door, even if Will Rogers, the most charming person we're all looking for, even that person with great communication skills, all the right experience, walks through the other door on that day, they've demonstrated they can do the job. Because that's all we wanted, is people that can do the job. Now, when word got out about this, and we announced it on the front end, 2 years before we opened, because we knew it was going to take some time to garner on the supply side that workforce. And you would have thought that we cured cancer. And you'll notice on there, in that middle one, it says, Walgreens is seeking leaders with disabilities. We did not think jobs for people with disabilities. We thought jobs. And it was up to the supply side. We have our requirements for jobs. Go out there and find people that can meet them. And we actively sought people with manager experience. Do it. We didn't find that many. Can you figure out why? Because those folks, their jobs are so perilous, keeping a job, most of those folks do not move much. Or that population is not as mobile as most typically have. They can't pick up their families and move. There's lots of things that go along. So we were not as successful, even though we looked on that. We had to end up promoting people with disabilities after giving them the right experience. Now, one of the people that heard about this program is a woman named Desiree Neff. Now, Desiree was working as a temp at some agency in San Diego. Desiree has this rare muscle condition, requires her sometimes to use a walker. Her son is legally blind, could never keep a job in retail. They figured out he could never do the cash register right because he couldn't see it. He was chronically unemployed. She's underemployed. One day she walks in with her walker, and her boss says, "What's the deal with the walker?" Desiree says, "Sometimes I need it." "Great. Come back when you don't." Desiree packed up her family, moved across the country a year before we opened to establish residency, to be in line. She was one of our first employees of that 75. She's been there 10 years. Is now a manager in that building. We would have never hired Desiree had we not been specifically looking and with intent to hire people with disabilities. Because we would have looked at Desiree and a couple of things. We would have said, gee whiz, when when she's using a walker, how is she going to carry cases around if that's part of the job? Or how is she going to be able to, most of our jobs are standing, how can she do that? Or some of our places are not accessible with a walker. How could she do that? There's another person over here that may be better qualified. Let's go with that other person. We would have missed Desiree. Now people ask, what disabilities could we hire or not hire? That's usually the question. Now, okay, you hired people with disabilities. Which ones you couldn't do? One of the first questions came up. We were going through this. We thought autism would be the most difficult disability. It wasn't. It's not. Every disability is different. Somebody asked, what about mental illness? Because that's a scary one, right? Mental illness. And we thought, well, I know we have people with paranoia, depression, explosive anger disorder, and that's just a senior executive team at Walgreens, albeit undiagnosed. So and actually it worked out. There hasn't been a single disability that we would automatically exclude, because every disability is a spectrum. And then that person that you were thinking of with a disability, if it was a cognitive or intellectual disability, and the spectrum is 1 to 10, 10 being most severest, that person that you brought in your mind, where were they on the spectrum? Were they closer to 1 or closer to 10? Because most of us, that image is closer to a 10, which makes us presuppose. I was talking to a vice president of a company and about this, and the general managers of operations wanted to do this, but it wouldn't work without the vice president's support. And so we had a phone conversation, and he started off the bat with this comment. Well, a lot of our positions are customer facing, so we cannot use a lot of people with disabilities. Now, I understand that comment, but what was his mental image of a person with a disability to come up with that? Because not everybody fits that image. And that's one thing we learned through this process. We all have these paradigms that are often false. Now, another person we had, I'd like to ask about this. This person applies to you. She went to undergraduate, made 1B. She had all A's but 1B. She went to Clemson, got her master's degree, all A's, summa cum laude. She sent out 300 resumes, and she's going to interview with you. Now, I have to tell you one thing about her, that her name is Angie. She has cerebral palsy. you're going to see her later in the film, and she speaks with some difficulty. She's ambulatory. She can walk, but she walks in sort of an odd way, and holding a pencil, she can't write as fast as I can with a pen. Or maybe she can, but it's not, it's need that penmanship. It's not near as good. And she can't walk that quickly, but she can walk what she calls now her sexy walk, because it's unique. She can say that. We can't say that. If she came to you and there was another woman like Angie that had the same grade point average or close, same job, who would you hire? If it's not, who would you hire? Who do you think most employers would hire? Would they hire Angie, who we might have difficulty understanding, or if we have a big building, maybe we think that she can't get out fast enough because of that, or maybe she makes people feel uncomfortable? Who would most employers hire? The other person. That's what happened when she went to that first interview. She went to the second interview. Who would they hire? That other person. Third interview, that other person. 30 times that happened to her in a row. What are the odds of that? Angie is probably the best HR person I have met in my career, and I will bet in the whole Walgreen company of 240,000 people. We went after Angie with intent, and she is running her own building in Georgia. And when Angie speaks, people don't have a problem listening because Angie has something to say. And when she walks her sexy walk, we see the complete person. Somebody we would have never hired. We would have been that 30 companies had we not been doing this with intent and missed out. Or Harrison. Harrison has autism, came out of the school system. I met him in a training environment as they were getting ready to apply. He's been there 10 years. He says, Randy, I can process 10 cases a minute, which is checking the merchandise, damage, making sure the count's right, agrees with the PO, match it up with the PO so we can pay it. That's his job. I can do 10 cases a minute. I said, Harrison, we don't measure in minutes, we measure in hours. What's 10 times 60? 60 minutes, 10 cases a minute. What's 10 times 60? Harrison says, I don't know. Now I know that's 600. Our expectation is 400. Here's a young man who performs a job at 150% of expectation, who can't multiply 10 times 60, who would have never gotten through our application process in that math test we have. When I saw him last week, Harrison looks like every other 28 years old. He's been there 10 years. He's got the goatee, a ball cap, and he has a radio in his ear because Harrison is the person who gets the call from all the other areas when they're running behind for somebody to come over and help them catch up so we can get all the work done on time, whom we would have never hired. And there are hundreds like him. And when we got done, we knew that most people, we'd have to publish. Because people would have, we really started out saying, look, with a third of the building, you've got to be efficient. You cannot carry a third of your workforce just by its existence. But we need to publish the data. So we gathered up 400,000 hours of work across 4 buildings, 35 jobs. And this is what we found. We found, I think this is, I probably can't see it. On the top left, at the top there, that's red. That's performance of people with disabilities. The blue is people without disabilities. Notice the red line's a little higher. Performance is a little higher across those 400,000 hours, 35 jobs, 4 distribution centers. But statistically, it's the same. People worry about safety. Will somebody walk out in front of a truck? Will they put their hand in the fire? Will they chop themselves in pieces? Whatever. I mean, we have all those kind of things. Could they cost us more in medical cost? Accident cost, workman's comp cost for people with disabilities is almost half of that, of people without disabilities. Retention is better. Absenteeism is half. That's the group that's there. Day of the bourbon flu, after the Super Bowl, that's the group that's there. It was a win, win, win across the board. Now, we did discover some things. We discovered a new technology that made this possible. It's called ATP. Ask the person. Ask the person. This is like one of the most brilliant things we discovered. For instance, our job requirements say, lift the case with 2 hands, job description. If a person with 1 arm or 1 hand came and applied, you're not qualified. Because 2 hands. Now, we show the job to the person and say, how would you perform this safely? Odds are they have a lifetime of figuring that stuff out. We don't have to do that. Or in our stores, if a deaf person came in to apply for a clerk's job, we would say, obviously a deaf person can't be in this customer-facing job, because what if they're out there on the shelf stocking the shelf and the customer comes up behind them and asks them a question? They're going to upset the customer. So it's probably not a good job, probably not a good fit. Now we ask the deaf person, what would you do if a customer came up behind you? How would they get your attention? And they tell us. My favorite story is in our distribution centers about lift trucks. Do you have lift trucks in your operation? They're fast, they're quiet, they're big, and they're dangerous around pedestrians, sort of like Priuses in the shopping mall, without the smugness. So the procedure is, in every industrial site, is you have to honk your horn in intersections. When you get on the forklift, first thing in the morning is you test your horn. How can a deaf person operate a forklift safely? Ask the person. Ask the first person, how would you test your horn? Well, what I would do is I would put my hand on the cowling and tap the horn. I would feel it. Makes sense. Ask the next person, deaf person, how would you test your horn? What I would do is I would pull up behind a group of people who are just talking. Ask the person. We have over 75 forklift drivers. Their accident rate is half that of people who can hear. Our engineers thought one time we ought to give everybody earplugs. People we would have never hired or never thought about. And what excites us the most about this is the impact it's had on management and culture. From the very beginning of this building, when we opened, there was a sense of purpose, place, engagement like we had never seen. When you open up with a new building, new technology, things break. We notice among the typically able population, what happens is people start chatting or walking off until it starts back up again. With the disabled population, what we noticed, they typically picked up a rag and started cleaning the equipment. And when we brought new people, we always assign them mentors. There was a disproportionate amount of people with disabilities who became mentors because they had to learn the job so thoroughly. They were the best teachers. And when you talk to managers, and we have these tours, because one of the things we did is we opened up, and I hope you would come as a group from Southeast Michigan to go visit Connecticut, same thing. We let them come through the D.C. We call it the Yes Virginia, there's a Santa Claus tour. Because what you would hope, what you could dream of about hiring people with disabilities is a reality there. First of all, you go through the building and everybody's first impression, okay, now where are all the people with disabilities? Because all I see is people working. And we go, yeah, 43% in this building now have a disability. You're surrounded by it. Now, if you talk to somebody or watch them the way they move, you might notice it, but first impressions, it's just a bunch of people working. But what really opens people's up is when they talk to frontline management. And we have a room at the end, and they sit down with frontline management and ask the questions that you might be uncomfortable asking somewhere else. as Donald Trump would say, the political correctness. There's no political correctness in this room. Or what goes on in Vegas stays in Vegas. So ask that question. How do you terminate a person with a disability? What's a bad day like here? Does this really work? What's the best thing about this? And you will hear managers say, it's always about numbers and performance. We didn't give up on any of our business objectives, but my number one job in this building is to make everybody around me successful. And that's the attitude throughout this building. We don't have a problem in this building when we ask for overtime, because everybody is in this together. And when I leave here, we have this sign that says, thank you for making a difference today. And I've heard a manager say that. I see that every day. And I think about the people who are counting on me and who have made a difference in my life. Did I give them everything today that I have to give that they give me every day? Wow, when you got team members and management aligned toward objective and mission, and everybody's trying to make each other successful, that's like lightning in a bottle. That's what we found. So I'm going to show you a quick film. We had a filmmaker who's now in Hollywood come down and film. He wanted to make a movie of this, and he talked to managers, and he ended up making about a 3-minute film, and it's the managers talking about this building. And I want you to, as you listen to this, how would you like to work in a place like this, or be a manager or a leader in a place like this, or be an employee, okay? So that's what we're going to do here. I think this will work. Can you hear it? Can you hear it in the back?
The one element that I've never allowed.
Is it too loud?
in my management style,
Too
any
loud?
facility that I've ever been into, and that's managing with love, managing with care, managing with a heart. That's the big change here.
It's all about the people.
That's Angie.
A manager can be successful in their role, but you have to focus on the individual.
That's Harrison.
Everybody has a different thing better. And it's up to me to find out what I'm better in it.
There's a lot of creativity, and to come in with no fear.
I'm allowed to be creative with the team members. That's not a hard line stance to where you either get it or you don't get it. It's an opportunity to see what the issue is and work with that team member.
That relationship that you make with an individual, whether they have a disability or not, makes or breaks that person's success.
We are very focused in this building on making folks successful.
As far as the key indicators that we look at for safety and productivity, we are the number one in our division.
We started each day as one. When Daryl made production, we all made production. When Melissa did excellent at accuracy, we all did excellent with accuracy. When John worked safely, we all worked safely.
It changes the whole culture of the building. You will have a team that thinks about other people before they think about themselves.
We've all been changed.
It's made me a better manager, it's made me a better man, it's made me a better father, and a better husband.
I'm a better leader because of it. I got more compassion, got more patience, which has not always been a strong suit of mine. I see folks for who they are now, as opposed to who they were.
So how'd you like to work at a place like that? Would that describe, I haven't been in a place like that before. So go down and see it because it is real. Come along for the Yes Virginia There Is a Santa Claus tour. Now how did it work out? That's about, there's a little bit more than this number of people with disabilities working in that building today. And we opened up a second building 2 years later in Connecticut, near Hartford. Almost 50% of that building is people with disabilities. And then we realized it was not about this automation. It wasn't about the thing people talk about, universal design and all those things. It was really the decision to kind of just open up our eyes. Not to lower the bar, but just open the door a little wider. That was all it really took. And all the other centers saw this culture and saw this high performance culture we had there, and they said, we can do this too. And every center did this. And that's how we got to the 1,000 within 4 years, 10% of the workforce. And we threw open the doors to even our competitors. Oh, by the way, this is what that number looks like today. That's in the Walgreens distribution centers. And then the stores have gotten involved, and they said 5 years ago, as objective across all the Walgreens stores, we want 1 out of 10 people, entry-level positions, to be people with disabilities. And that's taken a lot longer than we did in DCs because stores are built differently and really depend on the champions we have out there in the stores. But the other companies that came in, like we said, Mitch said P&G, they want to roll this out in all their plants in the Americas. Meyer is doing this one. And one of the things, I never envisioned this helping my son because I don't live near a Walgreens distribution center. The closest one is 150 miles away. But one of the companies, Meyer, Rick Keys is now the president of Meyer, he learned about it. He decided to launch this, and they opened up a center in Wisconsin, on the Wisconsin border, and Rick called me up and we said, we'd like your son Austin to be one of our first employees. So my son works 4 10s on the second shift, the shifts that people don't like, the one that works on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday night. Second shift in the refrigerated portion. But he gets to drive a forklift and pick orders. Doesn't like picking the orders. He loves driving the truck. And he's been there over 2 years now. Good begets good. Never would have guessed. Meyer is doing this across the board. Lowe's has about 600 people in their centers. Marks and Spencer in the UK is exactly the same as Walgreens model. ICA, largest in Sweden, is doing this. Up on the upper right, Natura in Brazil. There's enough examples that we know it works. It needs to be a bigger club. Now, people will ask me why I did this. Because that's the first thing. Why did you ever do this? And you did this to help your son. If this had been about my son, I would have never had the courage to do this. It was thinking about all those other parents I saw in those IEPs. Does everybody know what an IEP is? I got to go to 18 times 2. I think I went to 36 of those. Every experience is the same. You get there's some parents in there, or parent, and there were teachers going through the challenges and the successes and so forth, the tears, the laughter, the hope, the despair. We'd go in there and there'd always, disabilities plays no favorites. And I thought about all those folks in their stores who lay in their beds at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering what's going to happen after I'm gone. Do they share the same wish that I do, just to live one day longer? Because they're going to be thrown out to compete at age 21 in Michigan at age 26 to compete with a whole group of other people who are much better prepared and who we employers tend to look at as, why do I take a chance on an Angie or a Harrison or a Desiree when I've got my 75 to 100 people to apply over here? Who would make a difference in their lives? That's what gave me the courage to do it. Austin was a gift to me. It's what we call parents. If you have a child with a disability, we all say it's $1 million experience because we come out so much better. But also it's $1 million experience we might not take $1 million to repeat because of all the worries and challenges. But no doubt, Austin showed me a grand possibility. And I got to see past his disability, see a complete and worthy full person. Not a half person, not a mascot, but a fully unique person who does stand on the corner to say, I love you by his very presence. And the possibility and what Austin achieved that I would have never dreamed, that's what Austin's gift. But at the same time, that's why we did that. There are hundreds of people waiting for us. And all this takes is a decision to do it. Now I'm going to talk after this on two things. If a company says, people that want to do this, they don't care about doing this, ask me why I did it. People who want to do it ask me how to do it. So we're going to talk about how to do it. And then we're going to talk about how do you get people interested in do this, because some of us inside the company are advocates. If we're in HR, we can't make this happen in HR. Somebody's got to make that hiring decision. Operations can always trump whatever we try to do in HR. Because an operator says, you want results or you want to hire people with disabilities? Your call. We said yes. I was from the operations side. So is in legal, in all those other, if you can't, you maybe able to stop it, but if I'm in HR, I can't make it happen. It depends on getting somebody in operations to do it. We're going to talk about that. Or if we're in the supply side, how do we engage the community, engage employees? That's what we're going to talk about. I'm going to finish one story. Where did we take our inspiration from? We knew we had to have a big dream. To get everybody's creativity and commitment to this, they had to see it as something bigger than themselves. And we shared a story. There's a poet, Seamus Heaney, who just died recently, who wrote a play about the Trojan War. And in it there's this character named Philoctetes who has this magic bow that they need to defeat Troy. But Philoctetes has been disfigured in a previous battle, and you know how the gods punish you. There's some reason these things happen. So he was isolated on this island and deserted by his friends. But Greece finds itself in this war, and they remember Philoctetes has this magic bow that they need and they believe they need him. So they row out to the island and they restore him. And he goes with them. Troy is ultimately defeated. And at this point in the play, the author writes about how all the disappointments of the past, of the status quo, of history, keep repeating themselves. But then occasionally something comes along that changes that. Hope, an act of hope, can reverse that in an instant. And this is where he writes. History tells us not to hope on this side of the grave. But then once in a lifetime, a longed-for tidal wave of justice can rise up, and hope and history rhyme. So hope for a great sea change. Believe that a further shore is reachable from here. Believe in miracles and cures and healing wells. And like Philoctetes in that story, these, our children, our neighbors, our fellow citizens in our community, are living on the edges that await us. They await us to recognize their gifts. They await us to harness and utilize their abilities. And most importantly, they await us to welcome them as our own. That's what this was about. This is an idea whose time has come. If you want to do this, write down this number, 847-275-5110. That's my personal cell phone number. 24/7. If you want to do this, the world will move to make you successful. Thank you very much. Now I'm done.
We wanted to give everybody just a chance to ask any questions at this point, if any of you have any questions for Andy. If not, then we'll go ahead and take our 10-minute break until we'll have Randy come back up and talk about that how-to presentation. So are there any questions right now?
Yes.
the
Yep.
distribution centers. How are you finding partners for the retail stores? What kind of support and resources are you doing to help them, find the talent to interview, to select an individual disability?
Did everybody hear the question? How do we do this in our stores? We had so much partner support in our distribution centers. What do we do in our stores? The program's a little different in the stores. It's the following. We call it the READY program. You can go online and do Walgreens READY, R-E-D-I, Retail Employment Disability Initiative. It's built around a training program. So let's say in this area we would come in and look for, or a manager would self-identify to be the training store. And they would put out, we would like the training be conducted this date. And all the agencies can apply for that. And this is what we're looking for. We're literally looking, they'll say, we're looking for 3 or 4 candidates to take through this training curriculum. I forget how many weeks, and they're going to learn. And we have a curriculum that we also share with other retailers and have tried to make it common. So somebody that passes our curriculum, it's good for an Office Max, for example. And this is what we want from our partners. We want them to understand our jobs, make sure that they can provide a job coach for these 3 or 4 people, that they understand the job. We're going to manage them. We're going to supervise the training, so it's not like you work over in the corner. And if people are successful going all the way through that, they no longer have to go through all the other kind of typical screenings, and they're automatically qualified, and we can hire them. The purpose of the training store is if there's a job in that training store, we want them to be we'll hire them. If don't have a place for them that we have in our 5 set of stores that we're in a group, that we place them there. And if we can't place them there in our set of 30 stores, and if we can't place them there, let's help them get a job with some other employer. So it's sort of like there's no guarantee of a job in that one. In our case, we didn't bring them in unless we were planning to hire them. So it's a little different. Now, or people, and it depends on the store manager because you have to volunteer. We don't want people, you cannot assign champions. It's a volunteer position. Leaders, they volunteer. We did this, we piloted this in North Texas, 200 store managers. We went down there, had a vice president. We were growing market, had a lot of possibility. Had a senior vice president, was behind this, had a regional vice president, had all the right ingredients. We told 200 store managers who would volunteer for this pilot to be one of those training stores. We hoped for 10. 30 stood up on the spot. And then when South Texas heard about it, they said, what's so special about North Texas? Those Texans are like crazy. They started their own program. So, and right now it's being kind of rolled out piecemeal across the country because they don't have this, we only had 20 centers. 8,000 stores is a little different. But that's the way it works. But the same expectation of the partners. Because the business side, if I'm on the supply side, it's got to be the offer you cannot refuse because we would say, if I got 75 to 100 typically abled applicants, why would I spend more money for people with disabilities? We got to figure out a way to lower it on the supply side to make it a proposition that's hard to turn down. Because everybody's going to, first question, what if it doesn't work? What if I make a mistake? Can they really do the job? Those kind of things. So the supply side has got to step up. And you've got a really good state here. If you're in Illinois, I would a lot rather be trying to do this in Michigan than I would Illinois right now because we don't have any money. Or we have different priorities for the money we got, which is what happens. Was that helpful? I'm looking for feedback. Where's Dick? Any other question?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
What kind of resistance did you get from legal, and what did you do?
Okay, that's an excellent question. Okay, I have to tell you this context for this. What was the resistance we got from legal? I was on a panel with Lowe's and Clark Shoes. They were both doing this, and I was the third one. I remember the Lowe's vice president was right in the middle. They said, what was your biggest fear? Lowe's guy said that legal or HR would find out. Okay. And that was so true of that. This is what our legal said, because we said we're going to have this separate for people with disabilities. And a lot of people say, well, isn't that discriminatory? Well, yeah, and this is what legal said. Yeah, it discriminates against people without disabilities. That's what it discriminates against. And every other protected group we have, every other minority or gender, whatever those things, they're all included. Disabilities is the only group of those. It's all inclusive. So yes, you can have a separate pipeline, legal-wise. On the deaf lift driver, they had no opinion on that because I was responsible as the operator. This was my responsibility. I was responsible for results. And HR had only one question when I proposed it to him. Told him I didn't propose it to him. Is this okay? I said, this is what I want to do. Their question was, which is the only legitimate question, I think, if I'm on the human resources side, and you know what that question is? How can I help? Because and a lot of companies don't have that, but in our company, that's how can I help? And they said, can we help you with the training? We got all these training people. If you need more training, if you need help about doing it, they jumped on it. This is their success. It would be my failure, can be their success, and that's the way it worked. And that's the way legal was too. And I know that's not always true. Because when we're in those fields, I get into legal because I'm for justice. I get into HR because I do believe in human resources, and that's the foundation. We serve people. But when I say get in that job, it becomes about risk. And that's just part of the thing we get through. And we've got to help each other in that. But that was a very good question. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Another question with the job coach you said when they were coming in to train for the job. How did that work with for transportation with the job coaches coming to train with the future employer?
For the job coaches getting there?
And the employer.
Let's go. The job coaches, we assume that they would have transportation. And that has worked out to be that way. We changed the bus line. The city worked. We worked with the city, but the city modified the bus line to go by the distribution center, and we built our only consolation that we built kind of a cover so that people wouldn't have to stand in the rain. And that worked. Some of the job coaches still drive people to work, believe it or not, even after they're full-time employees. Now, guess what? I said, who pays for that? Well, the employee does, because they're making enough money to pay for that. And when I was there the last time, and we only had 10 people get on the bus, and I know we got 250 people with disabilities, and only like 10 people are getting on the bus after the shift. I asked Angie, why aren't more people riding the bus? She said, well, they prefer to get here another way. I said, really? And she says, when you pay people a living wage, they can figure out how to get to work. So that was, and this was a starting wage. All these folks are probably making $15,000, $30,000, $35,000 a year. So they can pay that, or they can pay the job coach to get them there. But the system has enough money to do this. We need to redirect our state resource. But oh, by the way, the cost of not doing this to society is a bunch of money. We had a woman say last night, just in transfer payments from the government, it's $18,000 a year not to work. We could divert those dollars back into the commercial side and benefit everybody and create independent lives. So there's no free lunch in this thing. There's a cost to it if we don't do it as a society, but from a job, that's how we do the transportation. Thank you. One more. Your question's got to be as good as the last guy's. Okay.
So when you're talking about an entry-level position,
Yep.
and you get into the point of fighting against Social Security, I'm coming to problem with that as far as not wanting to give up Social Security as an entry-level position.
It's got to be does everybody understand that on this? There's SSI and there's SSDI, and there's like all these, and there's Medicaid and Medicare. I mean, my most complex person in my household is my son. Oh, by the way, he works full time, and I forget, he makes, last year he made $20-something thousand, but he still gets those benefits. But families are so afraid of losing that safety net, they'll say, we can only work so many hours. And some parents underestimate their own children too. Some parents think the world should bend to their child. Some parents say, this is too difficult. So People can make the choice. When we started out, we said, if this is going to work, we're not going to go part-time because we don't go part-time for our typically able. And it's going to be same standards and same pay. Some people choose not to do that because they're still afraid. What we found out now is more people will get off that because $35,000 beats that 18, and they don't see that in cash. And they don't see a 401k with that. And they don't see a medical program with that, and a prescription program with that. So that's their choice. And here's the other thing. What we've learned now, we are kind of more understandable. We have had to open our eyes on so many things. Just give you an example. We would now consider people part-time, not because to accommodate people, which we'd like to do, because we figured out the job can do that. The work could allow people working part-time. That's good for us. That's got to be the standard first. And then if we can accommodate folks, we do. This made us change policies. We would change any policy or process that got in the way of great work performance, effective workforce that was inclusive. For instance, your discipline program is probably like our discipline program. If there's a problem, have y'all ever been in a discipline program, been in a discipline session? As a disciplinee, I've had both sides. It's typically like this. It's the person, it's the employee, and somebody from HR, and maybe from operations, the supervisor or something, right? And there's a form, and you fill it out. This is what the deal was, and it's got part down at the bottom, employee comments. Always does, and you sign it. And you always have to say, you don't have to agree with what I said, but you have to sign it, you have to acknowledge it. Right? That's always said. And our policy was we only talk to the employee. If a parent ever called us about their child, we only talk to the employee. If a relative called, we only talk to the employee. Well, guess what? We found out that sometimes those employees do not understand what goes on in that session. For example, my son, if he ever gets called, and he has gotten called in a disciplinary session, only thing he wants to get through is the session. And if they say, you have any questions? He will say, no. And the reason I know that, because I found one of those forms in his car. He had not been getting back from breaks on time. I asked him, Austin, what's this form about? I don't know. When did you get it? I don't know. What's it about? I don't know. What we learned, and also Meyer learned, when I found out, I said, call me. Let me know about these things. Making him a successful Meyer employee is now my life's work. I will tell you everything I know, and I will reinforce. If you'll let me understand your point system, I will make sure Austin understands that. And if you want him to hit 95% productivity every day, tell me his performance every day or every week, and I'll help reinforce that. So guess what? When we have a discipline session, we started off with people with disabilities. If they wanted to invite a parent in, sure. Yeah, and some parents are demanding, but guess what? Most are not. Most are on our side, and we come out with a lot more successful employees. And then once we did it for people with disabilities, why don't we do it for everybody? If we're trying to get successful employees. That's the kind of thing that opened us up on all this. So you have all these provocative questions. I'm sorry I'm taking so long, but you asking these provocative questions. You have another one? Oh, okay, good. Okay. Anybody else? So one more. Okay.
How relevant is it for the organization if they do not have, for example, a diversity and inclusion department when it comes to implementing a disabilities program within their organization?
We didn't have a diversity and inclusion department. You cannot execute this from that department. You can make it, you can be aware, you can be an advocate, you can be a resource, but you can't implement. The resources we used in HR, there was no such thing as diversity. Now, I tell you, I love it. I'm glad we have that in the discipline now. But I remember when we were discussing, we said, this diversity thing, we got to do something. It's really important. I remember all the officers sitting around. This is really important. I said, well, what are they going to do? Well, we don't know, but we know it's important. I said, before we get out of this meeting, it's going to be a vice president of diversity. Now it's the senior vice president of diversity. So that's, we didn't understand it, but we know it's important. So now that function inside the watering company is about awareness and advocacy. Because they've got to get the operators, the people where people are hired, have got to be the champions. Because they will trump. CEOs don't like to hear this. Vice presidents, we have this skill. It's called CFD, creative foot dragging. Any initiative that comes along, we can drag feet if we don't have a buy-in. And it's the person where those folks, I will tell people when people ask me, can I be the champion? I said, can you fire the person once they're hired? And if you can't fire the person, if you can't just one day out of the blue say that person's fired, you can't be the champion because they're not working for you directly. You got to be in the direct line, and that's where they work. So do I think diversity is important? Yes, but more as setting the field and helping awareness and doing that exposing. But then somebody's got to act, and you've got to definitely have buy-in with operations. Does that help? And we have a great diversity and inclusion department at Walgreens. We really do. And they are very helpful. They're part of the D&I. They're part of D&I. And they spread the word. That's what that's my sense. Making us awareness, the training, and all that kind of stuff. But they're a resource, advocate. And if people turn it over to HR, HR's got to go out and find the operating champion. Yes.
Well, and I work at Walgreens, and I'm a regional human resources manager, and like you say, Randy, diversity and inclusion is very helpful up at our support office in close to Chicago, Illinois, but they can't do that from Chicago on their own. So they're really great about educating us, keeping us informed, and then in turn, HR managers will help keep store managers across the country educated and informed and look for those champions.
Yeah, and the role is, I got your back. If you'll do this, I'm there with you the whole way. And that's the way HR was to us. I tell you what, as an operator, when somebody says, I got your back through this, it's a very comfortable feeling. And that's the way legal was, and that's the way HR is.
Can we interrupt and
Go.
take a 10-minute break now, and then we'll get into the how-to portion? I know some folks have to leave.